We just need it.
It would be a child converter. I think he missed it.
My God.
That's what happens with that. All like
Go. All right, Nadine. Bring it down here. Bring it down here. Pick up and dance. I can't dance. How to be part of the revolution. Mike Tower, yeah. All right, let's have a hand for Nadine, bringing us to power. Thank you, Nadine. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to day 2 of the 30th annual Starvin Vigil to abolish the death penalty here on the sidewalk in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. My name's Abe Bonowitz. We have death penalty action, and tonight we're all oppression committee, starving for justice. Many of us are fasting. We're 2 landmark Supreme Court rulings, 1972, we have it June 29th, the Furman decision struck down all the death penalty laws in the country. They wanted to have a death penalty to write a new death penalty law, which many did, from its legislature, just to write a death penalty law, and they started sentencing people. It was when we began the terror of death penalty again. The moment a cop says, you're going to fight for this, that's what begins. And the new laws allow people to be sentenced to work their way back up to the Supreme Court. And on July 2nd, 1960, death penalty laws were upheld and allowed the executions to. That is why we're here. We do this every year. It's the 30th year in a row that we've done this. And tonight, on our speakers, we're going to hear lots of different voices of experience on the death penalty. But our friend Laura from the Global Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church, and she is going to welcome us. They're the hosts, our hosts for our space, and she's going to welcome us and tell us a little bit about what's happening.
Thank you so much for being here. So grateful for your witness. So grateful right here. Oh, awesome. Thank you. Grateful for the trans wall are taking today. Real quick, I want to read from the book of Isaiah 58. You are familiar with this text. It says, shout loudly, don't hold back like a trumpet. Isn't this the fast that you choose? Releasing wicked restraint of a yoke, setting free the mistreated, and breaking every yoke. People are doing, breaking the chains of injustice. Understanding that we are death penalty, is that correct? Yeah. Are we here to abolish the death penalty? Are we here to testify to the truth that punitive systems that create harm, that do not bring transformation, are wrong? And we are advocating, urging a society where all can be transformed. Where all can be transformed, every single one of us are made in. Isn't that the fast? I'm grateful for your witness. Again, my name is Reverend Laura Kigweba, Director of Grassroots Organizing at the General Board of Church and Society. We work on over 30 issues Methodist Church advocates, but one of the most important that we unequivocally uphold. So we stand here in solidarity with all of you, giving thanks for your witness, giving the ways that you show up. RJ, are you with me? I think you are. Can you let me know why you're here today?
Because I want to.
Uncle with you. We are here with you. Aren't we here with RJ? Yeah. Aren't we here to where RJ, you can continue to be a child in your dignity. Continue in your dignity. We are here with you. And thank you all for the ways that you are showing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amen. My sister, thank you so much. That's what happens when you just minister who brings the power. And that's what we're doing. Somebody's telling me. Tonight we've got a number of speakers, and I want to start us off with Chivas. Are you ready? Where are you? Chivas. Chivas Watson. He was supposed to be here at the beginning, but got stuck in traffic in Atlanta. But he made it all the way, and he's with us all the way from Texas. Charles and I have Chivas down in Texas a number of times. The last time I saw him was just on May 19th at the rally, and I told him about this, and he said, "Okay, I'm there." And here he is. So many hats, including prison radio, and well, I better let you, Josh Watson, all the way from Texas. Welcome.
Peace and blessings, peace and power to the people. My name is Chivas Watson. I am the executive director of statewide service agency Working Group 512. We are based, headquartered in East Austin, and that's a long way from here. But the issues are still the same. In mass incarceration reporter on internationally syndicated the Prison Show, which is live every Friday night on 90.1 KPFT Houston. I'm also the commissioner for a Houston-based organization called the Black Gold Nation. I'm also... I appreciate it. And so hearing RJ ignites my spirit. Ignites my spirit. I'm in Indiana, down in the Delta. So you could say I've been chasing justice for a very long time. You could say the injustices, how ordinary they are, like blind spots in the courtroom, like dedicated without any support or advocacy tied to their case, has been on my tongue for a very long time. I'm also a felon, and I was found guilty in 2020 of a crime that I did not commit, so I know incarcerated unjustly, like many of our brothers and sisters. Again, I came from Austin. I left Austin Tuesday night. I jumped through many hoops to get here. But that's what it takes when you're committed to the movement. That's what it takes when you're willing to sacrifice to go what you not just want, but what you believe in. This is about more than abolishing the death penalty. The ones freed. We've got Kevin Keith in 25 minutes. We've got Rodney Reed that should have been late. We've got names on top, and I don't mean to martyrize anybody, and I don't mean to show bias or favoritism to anybody. This issue in just about every state. But as a fellow, that we've got guys and gals inside doing life without parole, life without the chance of parole. In the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, of my time, I knew guys doing life sentences for having a bag of marijuana, for being on the wrong side of the tracks. We've got to start really organizing together in discussing what our rights are. We've got to start really tapping into our leadership. For my leadership this year, I'm learning a special shelf controversy and identify shared values. And if you can lean into the conflict rather than the cancel culture, but rather lean into the conflict conflict, then you can not only identify remain focused on your desired goals like the men and women you see behind me. Year. The 30th year of such a purpose. We got guys from South Carolina. Does anybody remember George Finn's to death at 14 years old? We got folks from Connecticut. We got folks from upstate New York. This is an issue. This is an issue not only of death, that we are against at all costs. At all, do not support any state-sponsored killing. Killing or more killings. What's the purpose of more killings? There is no purpose. I come from a very far place. I remember on my route to prison, the Texas Department of Criminal gave me a jumpsuit 6 times too big and made me ride a bluebird in the rain. I come from a hard place. The guy told me I had 3 choices to make. He said prison was hot water. He said I could be shrivel up and come back out here to America's communities. That I could also be an egg and in hot water as an egg does because of my experiences and now learn from my experiences. Be a coffee bean, and some of you may have heard of this before. He challenged me to be a coffee bean, and what does a coffee bean do? It comes into a good cup of coffee. End of the movement. The movement has become more than just a hyper-local issue, a matter of jurisdiction. It's a connected web of fathers, of brothers, of mothers, of sisters, sons, of daughters, of nephews, who simply can't think what it feels like to have walls on top of walls, justice in the way of justice being tangible. To our brothers and sisters that are inside may not be able to listen to this. On the prison system to choose recovery. Of you here in the audience, it might have been a hard trip. It might be a hard thing. But I challenge you to choose recovery and redemption. To choose to fast. To collectively organize for the purpose of hope. That piece by piece, we get guys and gals home, acted, that returns that iconic decision. It's not that folks like Ron DeSantis and Kay Ivey and Greg Abbott can laugh while they execute our brothers and our. It's absolutely wrong. On last year in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice to the chair. It just so happened on his wheelchair permit expired. And when they threw him in the paddy wagon, heard him rumbling from side to side, and they killed him in pain. Sure, some folks do bad things. A thing called a second chance. Believe in a God of second chances. Forgiveness. And God sees all. And so, again, I choose recovery. Charge redemption. I charge you to show. When you go back home and you identify who, don't necessarily forget that they've continued on, lean into that conflict and continue to identify so that we can get the goal of abolishing the death penalty done. It is past time. We have men, women, being antagonized by police for the color of their skin, for their sexual, for the neighborhood that they come from. The injustice and the oppression need not take 290 to 45 and connect from 45, I-10 to 65, 65 to 85, and 85 to 95. Just a party. I came to continue the justice. The Bible says, "Thou shalt not kill." We've got men and women that are simply waiting to happen. And I know how that feels. Again, I come from a hard place. I appreciate your ears. I appreciate your spirits, your bodies being here in the space. Such fantastic people. Fantastic people. People who have given their lives. The death penalty is absolutely a violation of the 8th. Again, my name is Chivas Watson. I am 512 and also the in-mass incarceration reporter on the prison show. And I want you to remember that I've come to identify a shared value with all of you. And that is to free our loved ones and abolish the death penalty. Again, I thank you for the time and the space.
Thank you, Chivas. Just making sure our next speaker is still here. Chris Castillo is here from Texas also. Texas night tonight. We have Chris is a member of the board of directors team. I also want to welcome, if you haven't seen him, slide in. Anna Gross and Heidi Gross, sorry. One of the Gross daughters, and their father, Bob, director of Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing. Earlier today, we had the executive director of work. Earlier today, we had Cathy, Harmon, Christian is around here. There she is, Georgians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Hillary, Director of South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. And soon we're going to hear from an executive director of a new organization, Rob Dunham. And the Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing was founded by Bill, the co-founder of this event, the Journey of Hope, or the Starvin for Justice. Well, the Journey has shown leadership by bringing its leadership here. This is they're holding their board meeting at this event so that its members of the board can be present with this event while they do the business of their organization. So we're excited and that you do that so that we can hear from so many. Last night we heard from George White, our Journey of Hope for Violence, and now we get to hear from Chris Castillo. Welcome, Chris.
I want to thank you all for coming here today. My name is Chris Castillo. I grew up in Houston, and my mother on November 12th 91, I'm sorry, was murdered in her home. The two people who murdered her broke into her house, and they were from Honduras. They were two Honduran. They came in the middle of the night and they strangled her to death. And then it's Mexico to exit the country. Anyway, the reporter for the Port Arthur News at the time, and one day he said, "You know, if that happened to my wife or to my gun, I'd kill him." And I tell you, the death penalty wasn't even on my radar. At that point, it came to me is that would make me a murderer too. So I started on my journey. I worked in criminal justice for about 25 years. That's not the way. That's not the way that God wants us to act. And that's not the way people who are the Lord's children. Thank you very much. And thank
you, Chris. One of the newest people that's been attending here, it's their first time here, is our next speaker, Christian. Come on up. The Executive Director of Georgians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Welcome.
Thanks, Abe. It's a little hard to find heard. Okay, it's a little hard to follow the speakers. I just endeavored to do so. So I am Cathy Harmon Christian. I am the relative director of Georgians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. I started in October. When Abe asked me to speak, I said, "Well, what do you want me to speak about?" And he said, "Hard." And so I just thought I'd share what came to me. When I started this job, I used to be a teacher, a high school and middle school teacher, and children ask you questions that are real. And I thought to myself, coming into this job, and the reason why I'm here is because I care. There's a lot of story. There's a lot of life experience all of you or many of you have had. So I need to start with the questions. So I'm a group of students, and I had said to a teacher that I know who's a theology teacher, I said, "Can you give extra after school, because then they'll show up?" And they did. I had 30 kids show up and talk about the death penalty. And I want you to ask me questions that you have. And I have a few questions. And my question is, who do you think, is a person in prison? What do they look like? What do they act like? Talked, and of course they gave a lot of the stereotypes. Well, they're tall, and they're a guy. They got tattoos, and they're mean, and they have guns. They're black, and so we had a chance to really talk. I said, "Well, who do you think is on death row?" And they said, "Well, they're the meanest of the mean." Talked to my friend Mary Catherine Johnson, who is at New Hope House in Georgia. Could you describe for me your experience with the men on the row in Georgia? And she thought for a while, and then she said, "Right now it's a lot of old men." And that's not the image that we have when we think of people on death. So I was able to talk to my students about that. And then the question do you have for me? And they said, "Well, why are you?" And I said, "Well, I got to answer them truthfully, because they're answering me truthfully." I don't know exactly, other than people ask me to take this job on. A period of my life, I grew up as a Catholic, and I heard the death. I really thought about it, and then I saw and read Dead Man. And there's something about art, and there's something about poetry and their conversation of people, right? That film conveyed that to me, and I've attended vigils and I've done several things in the past. The rubber really meets the road, and I begin to really hear and the racism and the way in which things that I may have had are lived out in people's bodies and people's family. And so I know that this is where I want to be. And few days and getting to really listen. Mine all over. If you have folks that you know in Georgia, tell me, connect to them. We need legislators to put bills in to repeal. We need legislators to change the law on intellectual. In Georgia, we are very tragically the 50th of respect, the determination of being beyond a shadow of a doubt for someone to have to be able to determine that they are intellectually disabled and therefore not Human. We need to change that. So a lot of things going on, and one of my neighbors is here, and I hope I am very blessed to live a mile away from, and I hope he gets to share his humor and his story. I've been reading a book by Jennifer McBride, and she traveled one of the women on Georgia death row who was executed, Kelly Gisson-Danner. Danner was at Arendelle State Prison and was able to take a theology course, and wrote an address to her students. And in it, she said these words: "The theology program has shown me that hope is still alive, and that despite a gate or a guillotine, I still possess the ability to prove that I labels on anyone incarcerated, all those kind of labels, can be notoriously misgiving things. But no matter the label attached to me, I have the capacity and the unstoppable desire to accomplish something and to have a lasting impact for everything, and has a purpose. I have become acutely a much greater purpose than my confinement. In honor of all the people on death row, I and I pray and hope that we can end see what kind of a people we can really be. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. Next, we have a person who has ended one journey. I'm going to let him tell us about it the way that he wants to. But a person that we hear depend on in our movement so much, and has really this issue. And has seen fit to come and stand with us repeatedly and helps us understand the issues. And today, we're grateful for Rob Dunham. Welcome.
Hi, folks. Until 5 o'clock today, I was with the Death Penalty Information Center. It's a new journey at the Phillips Black Project, which is a national nonprofit law special counsel, a nonprofit law firm that handles capital cases, represents juvenile LWOP sentences, life without parole sentences, and other extreme sentences, fights for those who are wrongfully convicted. So I'll be joining them as special counsel. I'll be creating a new project, the Death Penalty Policy Project, on the kinds of things that we worked on at the death penalty for the course of the last 8 years. Now, you've heard here, I think, from Dick Dieter, my predecessor, who was brilliant to convey the issues involving capital punishment in a manner that so we didn't have to depend on the myths that were being propagated by prosecutors, by politicians whose interest was to climb office on the backs of people who are poor and improperly represented. I am going to be followed in this job by Robin Marr, who is really nice, not just a smart person, but gets it. Confident that the Death Penalty Information Center will continue to be the place to go, a critical information about the death penalty. You know, my job at DPIC was to be the press secretary for the truth about the death penalty. But at the death penalty, one step further, because what we didn't say at DPIC, and I think is undeniably true, is that the facts take a side. So if you're truthful about capital punishment, then the facts say the death penalty doesn't worked, won't work, will never work. And it doesn't matter whether that's in or Alabama or Missouri or California or Zimbabwe. Wherever there is, it will always be used to punish crimes involving favored victims, and it will always be applied like society it is, who are the least favored. Those are facts. In the United States, those are facts in Iran, they're facts in Iraq, they're facts everywhere there. And if you believe in fairness, and you believe in truth, and you believe in justice, in capital punishment. Now, when we move forward, policy project, there are certain things that I would like to do. Take a look at some of the practical issues and some of the controversial issues and some of the issues relating to how we think about the death penalty. When we think about the way Iran uses the death penalty, we think human rights. When we think about how Iraq uses the death penalty, we think human rights. How the United States uses the death penalty, we think about, is this a criminal justice policy? We should be thinking about human rights. For death penalty in criminal justice terms, it has to serve some kind of legitimate, and it doesn't, and it hasn't, and it never will. Purpose? Deterrence. If the death penalty deters crime, well, then value. Does it? No. Has it ever? No. At DPIC early on, when I was executive director, was of murder data. And we chose 30 years because the FBI data on killings of law enforcement officers went back. So the LEOCA data, and I don't even remember what the acronym stands for. If the death penalty caused police officers to be safer, there's a reason to have it in police murders and murders of police. It reduced murders in society generally, then maybe that was a reason to have it in. So what did the data say? We had an idea going in, but what we discovered was not only are there more murders in states that have the death penalty, not only are police officers frequency in states that have the death penalty, but that when states of murder rates did not go up, police did not become less safe. States for police in the United States were states that had most recently abolished the death penalty. Well, I'd like to be able to say that abolish is safer, but that's nonsense. Just as it's nonsense to say having the death penalty or police safer. The reason that police were safer in the state death penalty is because of politics. Because when legislatures, the issue of the death penalty and whether they're going to repeal the death penalty, they get lobbied hard, and they get lobbied by people who have political power, and those are prosecutors and police. So when a state has police murders, you have a much more active lobby reform when it comes to capital punishment. Police murders are highly political, and that's why you're seeing people who are running for political office these days. I can't even say tough on crime because it's more stupid on crime. But you see them pointing to police murders and saying these are cases where the ability to have appeals in the process. Well, what we want are fair proceedings and criminal legal policies that protect everybody. And the data that when there were low incidences of officers, that was less of an issue in the legislative debates, could then look at the facts about the way the death penalty really works. The facts take a side. States that have most recently abolished the death penalty tend to be the ones with the lowest rates of. Okay. When we talk about court, we think we're talking about justice. But is it justice when a court says, if you are innocent, you don't have a right to have a federal court review your case? Is it justice when a court says, you've been given at your trial, and you've been given another incompetent lawyer appellate process, and you've been given a good lawyer to take your case to federal court, and that good lawyer has found all sorts of facts and they're facts that because you've been given bad lawyers who didn't do their jobs. Well, the court says, it's nice that you have a good lawyer now, and it's nice that they developed all these facts. I'm going to let you argue that you were given ineffective representation, except you can't use any of the facts that your new lawyer developed. You can argue that your state Court lawyer and didn't investigate your innocence, or didn't investigate your intellectual disability that makes you innocent, or didn't investigate key things that might show that not of capital murder, or key facts that show that you never should have been sentenced to death even if you were. You can have that lawyer. You can have that lawyer investigate those things, and you can raise it to any of the evidence they developed. That's not fair. That's not right. Ask any child than he got from this building back here. One of the things I want to do with the death penalty is to look at these injustices in the manner used in the United States and recast them in human rights terms. 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. An account somewhere of how what this building does violates those basic human rights. Covenant on Civil and Political Rights says that there is due process right to full and fair review. These cases that have just been coming out of here show is that in these United States. Yesterday, there was a ruling, and some of our friends were here today talking about it. There was a ruling about affirmative action. The United States Supreme Court wants to make the law race neutral by ignoring it. In fact, they don't want it to be race neutral. They want it to be of any race who is not favored in the United States, doesn't have an equal opportunity. We will ignore race, evidence of injustice. And when white people, though they've been threatened because of efforts to do justice, say, you can't use race as an argument to give people equal opportunity. Well, interesting when you hear that, because race is all over the death penalty. As with many of these decisions with white privilege. And the white privilege much more likely to be capitally charged, capitally prosecuted, convicted, and capitally, well, it's the only way you can't be sentenced to death, is white. And you are disproportionately likely to be capitally charged, capitally prosecuted, capitally death if you are a person of color. There's some data on trends, because the first for the policy project, once we actually do things, is taking a look at now with the death penalty, what has happened recently, and how to explain it. And what's 20 years is that death row has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller every year, and death sentence less every year. And at the same time, that death row has decreased in size in disproportionate. And I looked at the data on offenders who are sentenced to death. And after the United States constitutional to execute kids for offenses that were committed before they turned age 18, death sentences for adolescent offenders became increasingly racially disproportionate. As the death penalty is used less and less, the power to grant mercy exercised for white defendants. So we have a white privilege penalty box to start with, and we have a white privilege that takes you out of much more favorably than if you were a person of color. I want to get that word out, because using the death penalty shouldn't mean favoring the more favored. Penalty less, just as using all extreme punishments less. Equal. But equal in fixing punishments, because the punishments are disproportionately applied to people of color. Being aware of and addressing issues of color. And that's what this building needs to learn. Now, one final wrap up, because Abe knows if limitations are not imposed. And all of you folks here are capital punishment. This is the only building where for the United States. But it is clear that under the current composition of it is not going to happen here for some time. Eventually. Because in the arc of history, there will come a time eventually when this court will in the United States do it. All the people wrongly on death row need to be heard. All the people are not wrongly convicted, but are wrongly sentenced to death. All of us need to be heard in our state legislatures. Death sentences have dropped in the United States % since the 1990s. We have abolished the death penalty in, what is it now, 27 states with capital punishment, 23 no. I should know that. I've been talking about this for forever, for all this time. Amazing what being hours will do to you. Ending the death penalty, it makes a huge impact. And that's the death penalty in individual states. And we need to keep ending the death penalty in individual states. But it also matters to this building, because that challenges the constitutionality of capital punishment is called the evolving standards judged first, based on the conduct of individual state legislatures. Each time another state ends the death penalty, comes one state closer to having an evolved consensus and just Supreme Court that eventually will sit here, will be able to say capital punishment. The other place that the death penalty is at the county level, and it is being abolished by local when they elect prosecutors who are in favor of criminal. Now, some of the prosecutors would say, we don't want the death penalty, period. We just don't accept excessive punishment. Either one of those is better than what we have now. And so the election of reform prosecutors drives down the imposed in the counties that have disproportionately produced death sentences. 1.2% of counties in the U.S. account for half of everybody on death row. So Philadelphia, which had the country in the in 2001 has had almost 100 people, no people being added. Chicago, Cook County, had more than 80 people on its death row, 86% of whom were people of color. Illinois abolished the death penalty. Boom. That's gone. Has more people on death row than any other county in the United States, and has elected a reformer, George Gascon, who says that he will not seek the death penalty and will begin to take people off of death row during the appellate process. So if this bill will not listen, then your local ballot box, and you can end the death penalty in your county, in your state, and create the national consensus necessary for end it right here. So these are thoughts to animate the kinds of things that I want to do with this new death penalty policy project. Appreciate any thoughts you have on myths that need to be destroyed, on disinfected, on people who need to be put in the spotlight, both for the good things they do and for the they allow to continue. And Abe will, at a future date, with all the addresses and stuff, and have the bank account open so that we'll get all that information out to you. I've represented people on death row for more than 20 years before the Death Penalty Information Center. It is time for me to be able to go back in their legal cases. But I do not, at the same time, forego continuing to move forward on the policy analysis. It's goodbye to a dear friend, the Death Penalty Information, but hello to what I hope will be an opportunity to be more politically active in policy decisions. And, thank you all for everything that you do, and it's really appreciated. Abe knows how to get me in trouble. All right, 2 questions.
I want to make sure you're kind of Washington.
Yes, Washington, and what it is, it's. Thank you. It doesn't take long to provide disinformation. There are the 27 was the number that was right. What it is that the United States has 27 states that Amnesty International as abolitionist in law or practice. There are 24 who have abolished and 3 moratoria on executions.
About any of the cases that you worked as an attorney. I know several of those people have passed. It's a moment that so many cases for so long. We know so many people. I just wanted to invite you.
Is there any of the cases that I previously had? That has to start with Harold. Our friend, longtime friend Harold Wilson, who was my client. Harold was framed for a triple murder in a crack house. I was there, and based on the trial, no sane person reading the transcripts would think he was anything but guilty. So when we were representing Harold, the first thing we tried to do was look at all of the things and the transcript, and we noticed that there was something in a press clipping that was found discarded in a sewer that was about halfway between and Harold's house. I was going to serve on the jury. So we had that evidence, and the court said, too bad, because the bad lawyer the first time, he actually did raise that issue. So it's previously litigated, you lose. And the training tape came out while we were on appeal, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court sent it back, and we won a jury discrimination claim based on the training tape. And, then miraculously, they found the jacket because they thought they'd framed the right guy. They found the jacket. Harold was tried initially before there was DNA evidence. And the jacket came back, and it's a triple murder in a crack house. Guess how many people's blood was on the jacket? 4, right? The 3 victims and got to be the killer. Well, when the DA's office sheepishly turned over the evidence, it was 3 victims and a 4th person who was not Harold and did not match anybody who was in their system. So they let him go, right? They retried him. And this is an ugly crime scene. I mean, murders are horrible. This was an ugly crime scene, and the photographs were really, really appalling. And the prosecutors sort of accidentally, but maybe not, left the crime scene photos on the bar of the, where the jury sits. There's the bar in the front, and they left them there, and they walked away after presenting them as evidence, and they left them there, and the jury's looking at them, and they left them there. And the defense counsel moved for mistrial, and the judge granted the mistrial and said, if you happen to make an accident like that again, I'm going to dismiss all the charges. So Harold gets another trial, and he is acquitted. And we had the pleasure of Harold's company in our lives from, I guess it was, I forget whether it was 2005 or 2007, but for 15 years. And what a wonderful person. What a wonderful person. In fact, the car over there, the blue Toyota Prius, I bought from Harold's brother so that he could get the commission, so he could give it to Harold so he'd have some money after he was free. And it will go over 230,000 miles, and that's my continuing memory of Harold.
Harold Wilson presented. Any other questions for Rob?
I have a question. Thank you so much for the multiple offerings that you provided. I'm curious for us at the local level, what is it that we can do in terms of voting in prosecutors who will not push for the death penalty? That's one step. How can we be informed? What questions do we need to ask? What does that look like?
Okay, a tough question. What can folks do at the local level to, one, be informed about who are, I'm going to put a spin on this, become informed about who real reform candidates are, and then how do we get them elected? That's different in every county. So the key thing is who is active politically in bringing about legal reform. Many of the candidates are former public defenders, but that doesn't mean that that's where you necessarily should be looking. I mean, I think we should be looking for people who have a very close and personal interest in the criminal legal system. People who have represented folks in communities that have been discriminated against at all levels. So it doesn't have to be a public defender, but it could be somebody who has gone to court and has been active in trying to prevent police violence against civilians. It could be somebody who has been active in trying to get prosecutors to create conviction integrity units. It could be people who are active in just, to be a district attorney, you've got to be a lawyer, but who have been active in helping change prison conditions or trying to just fight excessive punishment in general. I don't want to say bad things about liberals, but we are talking about people who are not your classic liberal. We're talking about people who are active progressives. They are activist. If you get someone who is not activist and is too much invested in the status quo, you are not going to get the type of reform that is necessary. But I was a better lawyer than I was campaign manager.
Any other questions? Thank you, Rob Dunham.
Thank you all, folks.
Last night, we took a moment to remember that this is the 10-year anniversary of abolishing the death penalty here in Maryland. We heard from Representative Glenn Ivey, who is now in Congress, but was the Prince George's County prosecutor. If you just head down New York Avenue in that direction, you're going to Maryland, and that's Prince George's County, and the 18th largest police force in the nation, and many other things. I know about the police force because I took that's where I took the Citizens Police Academy as an organizer working to abolish the death penalty. My job in Maryland was organizing in the district of the Senate. I'm sorry, it was the Senate president? Yes, the Senate president. That's what they tasked me with. It took, and in Maryland, as in other states, the Senate president is like God. They decide what's going to happen, who's going to get what, and my job was organizing in his district, and there's so much more I could say about that. I didn't mean to get into it too deeply, except to say that it takes proximity and presence. When I needed to figure out what to do about Mike Miller, the Senate president, I said to one of my own representatives, who do I need to meet to get with Mike Miller? And he said, well, you got to go to the coffee club, the District 5 Coffee Club. It was a police District 5, a group of citizens and civic leaders and homeowners association people who got together every week. They still do, and just met, and the officers from the local police department would come. And as an organizer, I just went and showed up. I told them I was honest who I was, but I listened and I participated and I contributed. I actually created, it's still being used, their email list, because they were passing out everything on paper, and I made it so they could do it by email. And then they were doing, if you know what National Night Out is, it's a night in August normally in August when the police kind of put all their stuff on display, give hot dogs to kids and everything like that, and try to build community for a day and sometimes longer. But I was there serving chicken wings and helping out, and they needed more water. And I went into the water to get some water at the police station, which was a former elementary school. And I noticed where they had the water that it was the auditorium/gymnasium with the stage on the end, full of all kinds of, that was their depository for all the stuff they didn't want to mess with. And coming back out, there was the captain. And I had this idea. I said, Captain, could we have an event here? And we did. They cleaned up the whole stage. One of the pastors that was part of the community there went and got his floor polishing machine, and they did all that. And we held a forum on the needs of victim families. And I couldn't get anybody to invite the Senate president. So I called and invited the Senate president, and he came, and he sat in the front row and listened to Bonita Spikes and other murder victim family members. Bonita Spikes was the organizer for victim family members and for other things, as part of, Jane mentioned her last night. And that was one of the things that moved Mike Miller. He came in, he sat, and he listened to the reality that victims' families, the last thing in the world they need is a death sentence, preventing their healing, putting their healing on hold. And I share that because it took 2 years. My boss, then Diane Russ Tierney at the National Coalition, she kept wondering, why do you have to be there every Wednesday? Because I was spending 3 to 4 hours going there, being there, coming back, being present. And then she came to that forum too, and she understood. It's what it takes: organizing, being present, being consistent. So all of that is to say that we won in Maryland. We voted in New Jersey, New Mexico, Illinois, Connecticut, Maryland, Nebraska, New Hampshire, Colorado, Virginia. Any other states abolish it? Who else did it legislatively? I think that's it. Now, Nebraska, I have to say that more Republicans voted to abolish the death penalty in Nebraska than Democrats, because there were only 8 Democrats in that unicameral body at the time. And the governor vetoed it, and they overrode the veto, and then the governor used his own money to put it on. So I still count Nebraska as a win, because we abolished the death penalty in Nebraska, and the governor had to put his own money into a referendum to return that. But we're still at 24 states that don't have the death penalty. 12 never did in the current era, and we've beaten back the other 12. 3 of those done by courts. Actually, Washington was done by courts, but they sealed the deal by passing legislation just a couple of months ago. So that's how we get to where we're at this moment. But it takes people, and Laura asked, how do we get the right people in? Is this still on? Yes. How do we get the right people into the legislature? Proximity. How do we get the right prosecutors? Sorry, how do we get the right people into so similarly, how do we get the right people into the legislature? And the answer right now is you go to jail with them. And I want to invite Laura Charcuterie to come up, because she went to jail with us in 1997 when a bunch of us unfurled a banner that said "Stop Executions" at the top of these stairs. And now she's in the Maryland legislature. Laura Charcuterie, representative.
Thank you so much. Yes. Go to jail with Abe and all these troublemakers here. It is good to be back. I am now Delegate Laura Charcuterie, but I grew up, among other places, right here on this sidewalk. I first came here in 1995 when I was 3. I was 22 years old, and I just moved to the area. And I had been working with Amnesty International, and it was the 3rd, I think. Was that the 3rd? Is that right? Someone who's been here from the beginning? I think it was the 3rd Fast and Vigil against death penalty. It was much smaller. What's that? That was my first one. It was your first one also. And I was so moved. I had been opposed to the death penalty my whole life. I had worked a little bit on it, but I was so moved by the stories, by the compassion, by the forgiveness, and so devastated by what I learned about the realities of the death penalty that I took it on as one of the major issues that I then worked on as an activist. And I went back to Maryland then in 95, started Maryland Citizens Against State Executions, which eventually was the body that Abe worked with to abolish the death penalty in 2013. I'm told this is the 2013 shirt. Is that right? Okay. All right. So I got that together. I got that right today. But, and since then we've continued in Maryland. 2013, we abolished the death penalty. And since then we've done a lot of work to continue to dismantle mass incarceration. And we have a long way to go, because abolishing the death penalty, of course, is just the first step, one really important step in the broader effort to dismantle white supremacy and mass incarceration. But what I want to say about it is, so in 2013, we did that. And in 2018, I was elected to the Maryland General Assembly. And I've had the opportunity to be part of social justice movements from 2 sides of the structures. I've done it as part of people's movements, as part of these movements for most of my life. And then for the last 5 years, I've had the honor to represent people in the Maryland General Assembly and to build a more just and inclusive world from the General Assembly side of the process. And what I can say is, even with what appears to be a great deal of power that I have as a representative of 110,000 people in the Maryland General Assembly, I'm really clear from that vantage point that it is people's movements that build more just and inclusive society. It always has been people's movements, and it always ever will be people's movements. And it is people's job in those movements to hold us accountable. And it is our job, if we're doing our job right, to engage with and organize with and work with people's movements to make those changes. And so really, first thing that I wanted to say tonight was just thank you for continuing to be part of this extraordinary movement. And you go ahead and give yourselves a round of applause if you have any energy left after 2 days of fasting. The second thing that I want to say, and is it Chivas? Is that right? Yes. Thank you. Thank you for driving all the way up here, and thank you for your comments, and specifically the comment about leaning in. And I want to encourage folks, if you're not familiar with your legislators, to become familiar with them, because I think you'd be surprised how few people. There's a sense that the legislators are somehow disconnected, and some of them are, but there's a sense that you can't just walk in and have these conversations, and you can. You'd be surprised how few people actually pick up the phone and call us. And so we get emails all day long, but when a phone call comes in, it's like a different thing that's happening in the office. And when a person comes in and says, I want to tell you my story, totally different thing that now is happening in that office. And I think this idea of leaning in and having those hard conversations, and even having the hard conversations with those members who represent you, who you think totally disagree with you, and they might. But I worked really hard in Maryland, even where, we're winning for the most part. But have these really hard conversations with the folks who disagree with me on both sides of the aisle. And stay in those conversations, stay in the really hard conversations, because it's only going to be in staying in those hard conversations that we're going to transform hearts and minds. And ultimately, your representatives are people who can be transformed. And so I want to leave a message of accessibility. And if folks aren't accessible, then they need to be held accountable for that. And so I hope you do go and visit with your legislators. You tell your stories. You tell other people's stories who don't have the ability.
Delegate who also gets arrested with us. Since 1994. So Bill Pelkey, Marietta Yeager, Cathy Ford, and Rick Halpern were up on this plaza. Cathy Ford's name doesn't get mentioned all the time, but she was there too, I'm told. And they were holding hands and just talking to each other. And a police officer came up and said, well, you can't do that here. And they said, well, we're talking. He said, looks like you're praying, get off. And the next day they came back and got off their chairs, and they were right here. And the police came and said, where the marble starts, free speech ends. And that's how it was for a few years. I came and once a number of us were here, we were talking, how do we address this? This would have been, a number of years later. And we said, we've got to do something, but we don't want to do it in conjunction with this event, because we want this event always to be friendly and not have the police upset with us and all that. So we picked a different date. Professor Rick Halpern realized January 17th is the anniversary of the first execution under the current laws. So that's how we picked that date. And January 17th, 1997, at the top of those stairs, we unfurled a banner that said stop executions, and we were all arrested. And I mentioned that last night, I'm mentioning it now, and I'm saying that and we had that experience, and there's so many stories there, but going to jail in DC isn't all that comfortable. Don't recommend it. Willing to do it again, but don't want to. In fact, my strategy, I think, for the next one is we should wait for the third warning and then walk off and not have to go to jail, but we still get our picture. And so we can think about that. Suzanne can give you the cockroach count from when we were arrested in 2017. It's in figuring out what you got to do to get these things, to get the attention, to get people talking. And that's happened. And that picture continues to illustrate news items about the death penalty over and over and over again. That's just as pictures of this event do. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that when people are arrested, and I say this just as a point of personal pride and privilege and angst, is that the 18 of us went to trial and we challenged that law and we lost. And we appealed it all the way to the Supreme Court and it was denied. And today, when anybody, like the gentleman yesterday who was arrested and tries to challenge his arrest in a court here in DC, the government's going to say, well, in Bonowitz, it says this. And that's it. It's Bonowitz versus the United States is our case from that first arrest that dictates what happens here. And it's bad law. We got to change it. That's another reason. We tried in 2022 and we couldn't because all of this was walled off. So we came and we had a little demonstration here. We went across the street there. And then we came over to the Hart building and that's where we got arrested. And I still haven't even acknowledged that ticket. So come and get me. I do want to say this. Rob said that this building, and you're right, Rob, this building is where they can abolish the death penalty. But it was Justice Scalia that said, you know, people who come and bark and protest at the court, well within their rights to do so, but they're barking up the wrong tree. If you want to change the law, you got to go across the street and change the law, right? And that's going to be happening. Now, it's a challenge to pass legislation, especially in this Congress, but in just a couple of weeks, and we're going to hear more about this tomorrow, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be seeing the reintroduction of the Federal Death Penalty Prohibition Act. The lead sponsors are Representative Ayanna Pressley and Senator Dick Durbin, chair of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, and that's going to be an opportunity for our entire movement to really jump in and educate people about the facts, and the failures of the federal death penalty and the military death penalty. So heads up if that's coming. So we'll hear more about that tomorrow night. We're going to hear tomorrow night from Reverend Sharon Risher, our board chair, Death Penalty Action, from Reverend Charles Keith, actually the Minister of Justice, and from Roderick Reed. They'll be telling their stories as well as a few other people tomorrow night, so want to make sure you come back. We've got one more speaker tonight, and hopefully Nadine will bring us some more music and we can dance our way out. But first, we're going to have Magdaleno Rose-Avila, Cathy, the boss. Do you want a chair? So this is Magdaleno Rose-Avila. I thought of a funny story, Leno. Now, earlier this week, as he shuffles up here, do you want a chair up here? No, he's going to stand. Good. So earlier this week, Magdaleno, this will tell you how far back we go. I'm not even sure what year it was. But earlier this week, myself and Gary and Charles met up with Marshall and a bunch of other abolitionists in Pittsburgh. And we stood vigil outside the U.S. courthouse there where they are hearing the death sentencing trial of the man who shot up the synagogue in Pittsburgh. Okay. And we brought and empowered local folks to do that. And then that was powerful. And we got some great media, especially in the Jewish press. And then we got in the car and tried to get out of town. And I was reminded in trying to get out of town about Pittsburgh, because there was a moment, Magdaleno, I don't know if you'll remember this, but there was a National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty Conference. And at that point in my career, I was sleeping on the floor in Magdaleno's hotel rooms and that sort of thing. And it was terrible because he likes the heat up at 80 something. But I survived that. But anyway, he was driving. I'm trying to remember if it was Kurt Rosenberg or somebody else, but we were in the car with you and you wanted to stop and go to a convenience store. And we thought we'd play a trick on him. He left the keys in the car, so we were going to drive around the block and spoke him when he came out. The problem is that we just turned left and suddenly we were on an on-ramp onto the highway. And we had to go a long ways. And finally, but he forgave us. Once we came back, he was very mad, but we came back, we found it because we weren't even paying attention to where we were. But anyway, we go back, Magdaleno and I, way back. And there's so many stories that we could tell. And hopefully he won't embarrass me too much here. But thank you, Magdaleno.
Bueno, para decirlo en español, es todavía estoy buscando venganza. I'm still looking for vengeance. Mexicans have a memory that goes beyond the last taco they ate. You know, it's great to be here on this celebration day. I became Southern Regional Director in Amnesty International in 1985 and 1986. We were having our first in the South since I had gotten there, a rally to recognize abolition. And Amnesty, I was bringing Amnesty into, because a lot of our Amnesty members did not want to work on abolition. So we were trying to educate them. So I was listed on the list of speakers. And I'd been to all the meetings we had with corrections officers and the leadership of the abolition movement, which in that day happened to be all white. And so we get to the day of the rally, and they tell me that I can't speak. The white leadership of the abolition movement. I'm the only Mexican in the audience. And they said, we don't think you know enough about the death penalty. And we don't need Amnesty International or amnesty rules or human rights. And Charlotte Holdman and other people wanted to make a big stink. And I said, no, this is not the place. I went around to all that leadership, the white leadership in the South, and I said, deal with me now or deal with me later. I'm not going away. And none of them are here today. And I'm here and you're here. But you know, I have to talk to you because it's not easy being an abolitionist. Because I have my fingers in a lot of pots and pies. And I was driving up here on Thursday and going down the freeway and my car started jerking. And I go, what the fudge? Well, I said some other words, but I said, what the fudge? And I couldn't figure it out. I pulled off at a gas station and then the car wouldn't start. It turned out that problems with my battery and my alternator. And I had to, you know, and it's everybody's getting ready to go on vacation. So they're having the cars worked on. I found a Goodyear auto place and they said, we don't know if we can get your car out on Thursday. But I spent 6 hours there and I kissed everybody I could. In the process, they told me the repairs were going to be about $800. I didn't have that in my account. So while I'm waiting for the car to be repaired, I don't have any money. I don't get paid by anybody. I started calling everybody I knew and I said, send money to my bank account or I'm going to have to marry a Goodyear representative. And I finally got the money. By that time, 6 hours in the waiting room of a mechanic shop, I was super depressed. You know, you get depressed and I go, maybe this is a sign I ought to go home. And I can shout abolition from Stone Mountain, Georgia. But then I thought about it a long time because I said, what if something else happens and I'm stuck? Because I didn't get in Thursday night till about 1 a.m. to my brother's. But I said, the abolition movement does not need me. I can go home. But I said, I need the abolition movement. I needed to be here to steal your energy, to take back your love, to take back with me your insistence and persistence, because we need that. We need to support each other. So I came to be energized and to be touched and to be hugged and kissed by you all, because that's what happens. And you know, people have skated around this issue, and I have to tell you, elections have consequences. In 2016, I cannot tell you how many progressives told me it doesn't matter who I vote for. Well, the man they voted for put 3 Supreme Court justices there. Elections matter. Elections matter. And you know, in my county, DeKalb County, where we live, and we register just about everybody. We've got about a 90% participation. And we turn them out in a nonpartisan fashion. You know, I got to tell you that elections matter. You know, when we were electing our DA, Larry Grassner in Philadelphia, I was living there and I told my family, every night we're going to go do phone calls for Larry Grassman. And they said, Larry, you know, the polls say that Larry's going to win anyway. And we said, we want Larry to win by substantial percentage so the police can't fudge with him. You know, because we knew they were going to be after him right away. So we went every night. I got my Larry Krasner shirts at home to call, and most of the people that were there were black. I did not see any abolitionists. And they might have been in other phone booths or phone banks, but we said we have to be there to do that. And I got to tell you about a couple of things that I've done over the years. In Colorado in 1972, which sounds like 100 years ago, we told the politicians, and we started doing voter registration. I had never voted, nor any of my United Farm Workers organizers had ever voted, but we said, Cesar Chavez said, you got to go out and organize voters across the state. So we went out and we tried to organize in the San Luis Valley. Nobody wanted to hear from us young guys. We had the right hair, the right buttons, you know, knew what to say. So we said, these Mexicans don't want to vote. So we went out and we figured out who are the most respected people in the neighborhood. And when one guy said, I think my grandmother's respected. So he said, call your grandmother. And she brought together about 5 other grandmothers, 5 other stay-at-home moms. And we said, all we want you to do, because they had not voted either, is we say, you just organize your block. Organize all the voters in your block. That's all we wanted them to do. We come back the next week, they want more blocks to do. With the grandmothers and the mothers stayed at home that didn't have the political acumen that some of us think we have, we registered 2,000 voters. We told the Democratic Party that if their representative could not vote our way, we were going to give the election to the Republican. And he got on the phone, on the television, the radio, called us communists. And in those days, they would shoot us if they thought you were communists in the San Luis Valley. And I called up the state chair, and she said, well, we can't shut him up. And plus, you guys don't have any power. We destroyed the Democratic candidate. The chair of the Democratic Party called me up and says, you are no longer welcome in the party. I said, I didn't know I was a member of the party. I'm just a Mexican. 8 months later, they call me up and they say, who do you think the candidate should be? So if you look at a lot of districts, whether they're a state rep, senator, district attorney, you'll see that a lot of them are winning by 2,000, 3,000 votes. And if we can't, and we do it in a partisan fashion, so if we can't turn out 2,000 or 3,000 votes, that's going to wake them up. You don't have to win every legislative district. You just got to win a couple of them. And if you don't win them, scare the poop out of them, because they will know that you vote. You know, one of the problems that we have with when we go to the governor, they look at the voting polls. You go to a state senator or state rep, they're going to say, who do you represent in my district? And you know, Abe is right. You got to be present. You got to be there. And that's what we would do. And so then when I'm working for Witness to Innocence, and, you know, I'm trying to think, because I lived in Seattle for 12 years. And I was one of the more active Latinos in craziness. So I worked for the election of 3 of my friends who became Supreme Court justices. And Steve Gonzalez, who was the first one that I helped elect, he's now Chief Justice. So, you know, and we elected them and we won by 2,000 or 3,000 votes statewide. And I said, why don't we, you know, Wisconsin, the big election that was there was on their state Supreme Court. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to make a difference. And we can do it in a nonpartisan way. So then, you know, Abe and a bunch of the rest of you are always famous for doing what the unexpected is. So we were holding a training in Washington State on conviction integrity units with the Seattle DA, and I had I think it was Kurt Bloodsworth and a couple other former death row inmates. So I called Steve Gonzalez. He wasn't yet the Chief Justice, but I said, Steve, would you be interested in meeting an exonerated death row inmate? He goes, yeah, bring him over, but we can't, because there was the pending case in Washington at that time. But he said, we can't talk about the case. So we went in and we talked to him about the conviction integrity unit, didn't talk about the case, but here's the first time a death row exonerated inmate is in the state Supreme Court in Washington State. And then, Steve got really excited because they have every year in every state, all the judges get together and they have trainings. He said, well, why don't you do a training on conviction integrity units? And so we went back to the office a week later, and then I got an email from Steve. He says, send me your draft. So I sent him our draft proposal. He edited it. We sent it back to him. He pushed it for us, and we did a training for all of the judges on conviction integrity units. And sometimes, and we did the same to the King County DA. I took one of the sisters from death row and Sabrina, and we went in and sat in with him and talked to him about convictions and about, exonerated people. Once they see the human element, and you got to be willing to take a risk. And because some of my people in Witness to Innocence, they thought I was crazy, and some still think I'm crazy. But I think you have to do, like this whole stuff with the Supreme Court. I never knew that Steve was going to be, how much? Two. Okay. He did like this. If it would have been the middle finger, it would have been something different. Okay. Two other things I want to tell you about. I spent most of last summer in Uvalde, Texas, where 19 kids were killed and 2 teachers. And it was a real education for me about the power and guns. And I think that we have to talk about that, because they make it easier for people to get guns. And they talk about safety. How can they talk about safety when they allow people to carry weapons and get them so easily, especially AR-15s? But you'll never see the NRA or the Republicans having their conviction and allowing people into their conventions fully armed. They will not allow that. And so right now, I'm working with people to put together, this is my last plea to ask for your help. There was a shooting at Club Q in Colorado Springs around a trans event that was there. I went and investigated, found a Latino family, the Fierro family. And what I found was that all this incident around gays and trans and AR-15s, it all came to a head. So we're raising money, and we're going to start filming in August in Colorado Springs, because we think, if we stand up for trans or gays, women, we're standing up for ourselves. And that's why we're going to make this film. And people say, well, you're crazy. And I go, yeah, I'm crazy, but crazy gets it done. And so if you're interested in the film, you can come with us when we're filming. You can talk to us, help us do research. We're getting more people excited about it, because we must stand up. We must produce the products that we can do. Remember that no matter how strong we are, no matter what, everything that we do, we're stronger when we are together. And for all the people that aren't here but can see us all over the place, every time we have an execution, I'm emboldened. I'm emboldened because of the work that people do. And for my whole life, I've had mud wrestling matches with Abe, because we don't always agree. But the one thing that I admire is Abe says he's going to do something, it gets done. And that's why this movement is stronger. So gracias.
Thank you, brother. Something I learned from this man is if you surround yourself with good people, you come off looking good. So it's not me. It's all of us. It's everybody that chips in. It's everybody that helps us make it happen. It's everybody that's going to help us carry these chairs and these tables and all this stuff inside before the rain hits. But first, at 9 a.m., there is Red Letter Christians are having a prayer meeting. It's a monthly prayer, but they're dedicating it to the fast and vigil. And I'll be sending out a link to everybody about that, so you can get on and be a part of that if you want to. And so you'll watch for an email about that. We're back here at 8:30 in the morning all day, except tomorrow night we don't shut down. We go overnight, all night until all day on Sunday, and at midnight we'll break our fast. So you're welcome to come anytime, any part of that. Come back tomorrow night. We're going to hear from Sharon Risher, Roger Creed, Charles Keith, others, and any questions? Thank you for watching online. There's much more to say, much more to do, and we'll keep doing it. We're grateful that you're here. And please help us get the stuff inside before the rain hits. It is coming, and it will be hard.